It's always a good week when Xavier goes 2-0. Welcome back to another Musketeer Bandits podcast. As always, I'm Ben Haller alongside John Baldridge for another midseason episode, another interesting week for Xavier. Obviously, like I said, two wins. Well, I guess it's not technical. It's about a week since we did a podcast, and those two games against Wake Forest and Siena. This is the last time we recorded. Um, two wins by decent margins. But Sean Miller was a lot happier after one than the other. We'll start with the one that he was happy about, and for good reason. They got a 75-60 win over Wake Forest, a game that looked sloppy for a while, but Xavier started to turn it on and really forced Wake Forest to turn the ball over. And my first impressions from that game is just, we'll get to it later when we talk about the Siena game, and it kind of took a step back, but that defense was really impressive in the Wake game.
Yeah, I mean, right now you have a 20-point scoring margin. You're scoring your teams, are scoring 84, you're giving up only 64. And the Xavier team, we talked about their starting five, starting with Conwell. That press defensively has really helped the points offensively for the Musketeers. I've seen just a very confident starting five from Conwell to Zach Freemantle to the rest of the guys you have on that starting five. But when you get down to the deeper part of the bench, I think that's where that frustration comes in, that kind of those comments we talked about on Wednesday from Sean Miller that we'll talk about and get into here in a minute. But very dominating win against Wake Forest. You win by 25 points. Your offense looks well. Conwell puts up 21. And defensively, the Xavier team is getting better since the start of the season. They really struggled in those first three games, but since then they have turned it on defensively. And here now, 5 games in, looking very good.
Yeah, for those first three games, obviously they went 3-0, but against some lesser opponents, Ryan Conwell was fantastic in those first three games, and he shot really well from the field, from three, from everything. Um, my biggest question was, all right, they were still struggling with Conwell playing that well. What's going to happen when Ryan Conwell has an off day or isn't shooting too well? You could argue that in this Wake Forest game, he had somewhat of an off day. He went, I think it was what, 5 for 14 from the field, 4 for 11 from three. I mean, those aren't like horrible numbers, but those are not Ryan Conwell level numbers. And he still had 21 points. He got to the free throw line a lot. And another really good thing he did too. We played really good defense. Wake Forest's second best player, Cameron Hildreth, I think it was what, 2 points in that game, and Conwell was guarding him for pretty much the whole game.
Yeah, you brought those comments up in the presser against Wake Forest, and Sean kind of just pushed him off. But Conwell really talked about how he has faith. Sean has faith in him to go out there when he's not shooting the ball well, to just keep shooting the basketball. And that's what we've seen from a guy who played really well at Indiana State, came here to Xavier, and he's just bought in this Musketeer mojo of all in we've always talked about all season long. And I think he's a big definition of why we're playing good basketball, but you got to look at Fremantle too. You got to look at some of the other guys we talked about, Davion McKnight, and just the belief in that starting five. But getting into those points about the game on Wednesday, Xavier just really struggled with the back half of their bench. I thought that's kind of where the defense was a lack for the Musketeers, those 8 or 9 players you see on the back half of the bench, those 3 or 4 guys. And that's something Sean Miller talked about. If the defense doesn't step up, you're not going to play, and we'll see what happens. But it's still, you win by 15 on Wednesday, and still frustration by Sean Miller.
It brings up an interesting point. And yeah, like I said, I asked both Ryan and Sean about it in the presser. One of the things about I specifically asked Ryan was, I think it was Connell started the game 1 for 4, 1 for 5 from three. And then you see a timeouts called early in the second half to draw something up. Coming out of the break, they run two set plays for Ryan Conwell to get open looks. Makes the first one, misses the second one, but still end up hitting a couple more throughout the duration of the game. But that just shows the confidence that Sean Miller has in Conwell. And also, like, they need him to make shots to be a big part of the offense. And they haven't had that issue yet. I think he's made a total of 8 threes in the last couple of games. I don't know what his exact 3-point numbers are in the year in terms of volume. He's shooting at a very high clip. Hang on, I can pull it up. Shooting for three right now at 53%, which is just pretty unheard of. Volume wise, yeah, he's 20 for 36. So 23s over 5 games. He's averaging 4 3-pointers made a game. And Xavier just hasn't had that in a while. Oliveri was below that last year. So Sule Boom was under that a couple of years ago. And I mean, it's just 5 games, so try not to overreact to anything. But it brings up an interesting point. When you look at the Sule Boom and the Quincy Oliveri, John Rothstein had an interesting tweet about it, about comparing Ryan Conwell to Sule Boom and Quincy Oliveri. And I think if you add in his defense and his shot making ability, my hot take is I think he's going to leave here having those are both 1 year guys. And Conwell, if he wants to, has another year after this year. He's just a junior. But if you just take into account this year, I think Ryan Conwell is gonna be better in a Xavier uniform than those two were. And that is saying a lot.
Yeah, against Jackson State, like 3 games back, you got pushed around on the boards. Those second chance opportunities weren't there. And you mentioned it. If Ryan Conwell doesn't shoot the ball well, can Xavier rely on the 3-point shot as they've done through the first 5 games to win them basketball games late into the non-conference schedule and getting set for conference play here in January? And I think it's going to be interesting, Ben, to see if that point comes, if it comes down in this tournament against Fort Myers, against South Carolina today, or also against some teams later this week or later in the conference play. But right now, you got to like what you've seen from Conwell, from McKnight, from these starting five, from the guys who shoot the basketball out there. But it's going to be interesting to see if that does come to play at some point this year.
Yeah, but again, it's like you worry about when Conwell's not on. If you go back to the schedule last year for Indiana State, there weren't a whole lot of those games. He averaged 4 3-pointers made a game last year, so this isn't something that's new for him. And one of the things I was most excited about him coming to Xavier is you put someone who can make the three at that level in a Sean Miller system. I mean, you look at what Sean Miller has done with mid-major guards, the ones we've already talked about. And Connell is just the biggest recruit out of those three. So that's one of the biggest reasons I have him having a better year than those other two did. The other big part of it too, I think it was 100 and so it was Quincy Oliveri set the Xavier single season record a season ago, beat Trayvon Blewett's record of 3-pointers made in a single season. Ryan Conwell made like 7 more than that last year at Indiana State, and now in the Sean Miller system. I'd say it is hard not to be excited about that. Um, yeah, defense looked good, like I talked about. Conwell was a big part of that. Sean Miller said that he had a decent amount of, or led the team in deflections, which is one of the biggest things. They forced Wake Forest to turn the ball over a lot. There really weren't a lot of unforced turnovers. I mean, Xavier really played good defense, got in passing lanes. It's not a great Wake Forest offense per se, but still got to give them credit where credit's due. We move on a few days later, take on Siena at home, the return of Reed Ducharme, who ended up leading Siena in scoring with 15 or 16 points, knocked down a few threes, had a few nice plays. Xavier won the game by 25. Sean Miller did not look like he was the head coach of a team that just won a game by 25. I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the quotes exactly, but he had a couple of quotes talking about number one, he said like there's a virus on this team about guys who just want to score and just want to try to get as many points as possible without wanting to do other things. And they also talked about people not playing hard defensively, and that was pretty eye-opening. I know Sean Miller's always one of those coaches where I don't know if you're ever going to see him satisfied, but after a 25-point loss, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I thought it very interesting stretch into that game, and I was there for that press conference where Xavier, right before the 12-minute timeout, they gave away 7 straight points, and it was a 1-point ball game at the time. But Xavier was able to get a steal, a three ball by Trey Green, and a dunk by Fremantle, able to go on an 8-0 run right after the timeout under 12 and take a 9-point lead at that time. But yeah, they were back and forth in that game for stretches, but Xavier was able to get the victory. And I feel like those comments from Sean Miller was something that happened in the second half, something that Xavier didn't play a clean 40 minutes that they struggled to this year. They've only had a couple clean games. I think Sean Miller's really been happy about, but you're able to still win the basketball game by 25 points. And now you get ready for a tournament coming up. But I was satisfied morally with the win on Saturday.
Yeah, I definitely think Sean was more satisfied with Saturday's win as well instead of Wednesday's. Um, yeah, okay. Well, I'll go to his first quote that I thought was interesting, where he was talking about, these players don't know their roles, and Sean said it's his job to give them defined roles, and he said it's easy. when he talks about too many guys wanting to score the ball, the problem I have with this is at this point in the season, Xavier's shooting 48% from the field, and they're shooting 43% from three. So I don't look anywhere. Maybe there's one guy I look at in particular. We'll get to it in a second to see, in terms of shooting the ball, that someone's shooting the ball too much. So my question to you is, and I'll answer this after you go. My question to you is, who do you think he's talking about the most? One or two guys where he says that they don't know their rules.
Well, you're still out rebounding every team right now. You're averaging 35 rebounds per
Right. So
game.
that's
The
not an
team's
issue.
30. So, I mean, Trey Vorey losing him is a big loss. And yeah, the front court has been a little up and down to start the year, but it seems like Hughley's coming in transition. It seems like Hunter's getting better. It seems like
Right.
Fremantle's been there the whole year. So I don't think that's been the problem. I think that's where Sean Miller might see a problem, but I still think our point guard play has been really good. Conwell's been really good. So I don't really know. I think you have to be satisfied where you're at, but you would like to see more from the front court, I would say, moving forward.
See, but again, the front court's not taking many shots, which is what I just don't understand about it. I look at it this way. There are two guys off the bench right now that seem that kind of just fit the wordage of what Sean Miller was saying about guys who just want to score first. That's all they're worried about. If I had to point to two guys, it'd be Trey Green and Dante Maddox. Now, Dante Maddox has not shot well from the field at all this year, and we know he can. We saw his numbers at Toledo in a very decent MAC conference. Very good three-point shooter. He's still just trying to find his groove, find his confidence a little bit. Trey Green's been hot to start the year, and some of those very gutsy shots have helped Xavier to this point, especially in the Siena game, helped give him a little bit of confidence, a little bit of momentum. So I, the other issue I have with Sean having issues with guys taking too many shots, he recruited a team of a bunch of guys who were score first guys at whatever college they were from or wherever they are. Besides maybe like Dalen Swain and Jerome Hunter, everybody else, if you look at what their best part of their game is, it's offense and scoring the ball.
Yeah.
So I I could see why Sean wants more defined roles, but I don't see how he could be so upset with it for the first 5 games, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's a solid point. And you talk about Maddox, who was a scorer. You talk about Conwell, who was a scorer. And, this team is trying to come together. And Ben, we looked at a team through 5 games and we talked about it coming in. This is not a very tough non-conference schedule. Yes, you played Wake Forest. Yes, you'll get South Carolina, Michigan, Virginia Tech this week. But this isn't last year's non-conference schedule. This isn't 2022 non-conference
He'll
schedule.
never play that
This is
again, too.
this is an easier non-conference
Yeah.
schedule just because Xavier wants to have a better record when it comes into the conference schedule because last year it didn't help them in seeding in the NCAA tournament. So Xavier's trying to play an easier non-conference schedule. So I don't know how much it can tell you right now, Xavier being 5-0. That's the thing I think Sean Miller's worried about the most. Is this team ready for these big conference games coming up? I question it too, but right now, as a Xavier fan, what you've seen from this eye vision is this team looks very good.
I think what you tell yourself maybe right now is, especially if we want to have a positive outlook on it, is that just that they've played down to their competition at points. And you really use that Wake Forest win as confidence in this team. And for good reason. I mean, it should. That they looked really solid in the Wake Forest game. They didn't shoot that crazy either. I mean, this is a team that's going to be led just by sheer shot making and field goal percentage, and probably won't play a ton of defense this year. To get a win like that against Wake Forest, where they didn't do any of those things well, is pretty impressive. One of the other things we talk about the defense. Sean had another quote again. I'm paraphrasing where he said something along the lines of, "If you don't give everything on the defensive side of the ball." For 40 minutes, you're not going to play. Those are another couple of guys. I think he's talking about different guys when he's talking about that and talking about defined roles. I think when he's had issues defensively, in the last couple of games, I've tried to pay attention more on the defensive side of the ball. I, that's where I think he's having trouble with the front court, with Fremantle and Hughley's on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's three guys almost, only three guys that I think are almost off the hook defensively. That's Marcus Foster, Dalen Swain, and Jerome Hunter. Those three have been really good defensively this year. Other than that, I can see that statement from Sean a little more than I can see the other one.
Yeah, Marcus Foster was excellent against Siena, I thought, defensively on Wednesday. And if you're Sean Miller, you got to be happy what you've seen from some of those guys, as you mentioned. But there are a lot of falling apart times. I mean, he's talked about it multiple times this year, not playing a 40-minute game. And if not playing a 40-minute games mean guys that are playing in the basketball game aren't giving you their everything they got. And that comes defensively, where Sean Miller has always been talked about as a defensive coach, a guy who his defense is going to lead to offense. And we've seen that the last couple of years. And this year, yeah, you win by 25, but there are laxes for a team that knows they can play better and teams they should easily beat. And they've struggled to do that sometimes throughout.
Yeah, that's tough. I talked about how confident I was in Conwell's defense going back to the Saturday win against Wake Forest. He was in foul trouble against Siena, but right, Sean still played him a decent amount. I think he got two fouls early, and then he still played the last like 10 minutes of the first half. So maybe that hurts you defensively a little bit, but it did seem like Conwell took a little bit of a step back defensively. Foster and Swain Hunter have been great. McKnight, Freemantle, and especially the bench with Hughley, Green, and Maddox. So the bench outside of Hunter, they've got to be better defensively.
One thing I can say is fouls from those guys in the front
Yeah,
court. I feel like we fouled way too much this year. McKnight's had a game where he's had four fouls, which you never saw last year
yeah,
from.
right.
So I just got to say the defensiveness, you got to make sure you don't foul as much because right now Xavier struggled with that. Yeah.
That's another thing that Sean was talking about. Even after the Saturday win against Wake Forest, where he said he was happy with the performance, but he said they just fouled too much. And I mean, that's just another byproduct of, getting beat defensively. A lot of times you have to make up for getting beat defensively by fouling. So that can convert to points sometimes. But when
Yeah.
comparing it to these last couple of teams, obviously they've been offensive heavy. 2 years ago, the team was one of the best offensive teams in the country, one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country, one of the best assisting teams, one of the best teams in the country sharing the ball. I guess I'll say it that way. That seems a lot like what this team is going to be. And once again, the defensive struggle. So I think Sean, I said it in the offseason, and I asked all the players when I did the offseason interviews was it really seems like with the makeup of the guys, he's just trying to build another 2022-23 team. And that team made it to the Sweet 16. They were a top 12 team in the country and earned a three seed. Uh, the question is just, I don't know if they have that much offensive firepower to make up for the defense. We'll see this week, though. It's going to be interesting. Only, I think, 6.5 point favorites opening up against South Carolina. The Fort Myers tip off tomorrow. I was surprised the spread was that small. South Carolina has really struggled this year. They have a bye game loss already to North Florida on the first game of the year. They got beat by Indiana pretty bad by 16. And kind of like Xavier, they have some teams they should beat by a lot more than they're beating.
Yeah, I haven't really studied South Carolina a whole lot, but from what I've seen on paper, and of course, you go into Indiana, you saw them earlier this year. But yeah, this team Xavier should beat. They should win that basketball game. And, this is a tournament, this is a test for Xavier, chance to go on the road, to show what you're all about. You're away for 3 or 4 days. You take on South Carolina, possibly Michigan or Virginia Tech, and to win two games. And Xavier has looked well so far. You get a win here inside Centos against Wake Forest on a Saturday, but now it's a chance to show it on the road against some tough competition.
Yeah, it's the first time that they're playing a game outside of Cintas Center this year. So the first time for a lot of the newcomers that they're not playing a home game. It doesn't really act as a huge road environment when you go to these MTEs on neutral sites. But they get weird sometimes, especially just because you're playing in smaller arenas and you're playing multiple games in a really short span. So I'm interested to see how they put this week together. The concerning thing about South Carolina, their best offensive player, Colin Murray Boyles, is averaging 16 points a game. 64% from the field. He's a plays more of a, as a post, 6'7", so he's a smaller post, but he likes to post up a lot. He's averaging almost a double double at 6'7" with 9.4 rebounds per game. We talked about the defensive struggles up front for Xavier. Zach Freemantle and Dalen Swain are going to have a pretty good defensive game for Xavier to win.
Yeah, you when you talk about, teams that you're supposed to beat, you always look at the point guard. And if they have a good point guard, it's going to be a tough basketball game. But you also can say that for a front court guy like we saw Edie last year take on a South Carolina team. You mentioned Wake Forest earlier this year when Xavier struggled against a 7-footer, but we're able to kind of keep them in check a little bit. They can try to keep these guys in check. And if Fremantle and Hughley and Hunter can do that, it's going to be beneficial. And losing Trey Vorey was crucial loss for the Musketeers. We talked about it earlier on this year before the season, but losing him, losing your biggest rebounder coming in was crucial. But this Musketeer team's going to have a tough task here tonight.
Yeah. Colin Murray Boyles, 16, averaging 16 and 9. They do have a decent point guard and Jacoby Wright, but he's undersized as well. So I think that matches up with the Xavier team. I would assume that they're going to put Dalen Swain defensively on Murray Boyles because he's more of that four. They do have a 6'10" guy they also put in the starting lineup, and Nick Pringle. So I'd assume Fremantle's on Pringle. Swain is on Murray Boyle. I, I, I struggle to like say this, but there's just not a whole lot that scares you outside of those two guys. Well, I'm talking about Murray Boyles and Wright. But again, you saw the Xavier team last year against Washington. I mean, talk about a year of ugly, ugly games. Just a rough season for Xavier a season ago. Take out the UConn game at UConn. That might be one of the roughest games they had. Washington played so bad. They were a bad team. And Xavier just could not figure anything out offensively. They turned the ball over a ton. And those are the kinds of things that happen in the MTE tournaments. So South Carolina struggling this year doesn't exactly mean that it's as easy of a win as, say, if it was at Cintas.
Yeah, last year I thought you really struggled just with the guys in the front court. You mentioned the Europeans holding onto the basketball. And here with this Xavier team, you feel more confident with Fremantle and Hughley and Hunter holding onto the ball, getting down low in the post, taking a shot, Fremantle from outside from 15, 20 feet away. And that's something you didn't have last year with a Xavier team. So more confidence just for our big guys. But when you go up against 6-footer, 6'10s, 6'11, 7-footers, it's going to be a tough task for a team that doesn't have a whole lot of depth inside.
All right, so that's the first game of the Fort Myers tip-off. They will then go on to play, obviously, whether they win or lose, the winner or loser of Michigan, Virginia Tech. I'll start the conversation by saying this. Uh, if it's all chalk, it would be Xavier and Michigan in the championship. Xavier beating Wake Forest, Michigan beating, or Xavier, wow, Wake Forest. Xavier beating South Carolina and Michigan beating Virginia Tech. Here's a matchup. Obviously, you don't want to get too ahead of yourselves, but here's a matchup that I find would be really interesting if Xavier took on Michigan. You know why, John?
Why's that been?
Because Michigan starts two 7-footers. So that means Dalen Swain would be
So
guarding a
we talked about, yeah.
7-footer. But it also means that a 7-footer would have to be trying to go out and guard Dalen Swain on the perimeter. Yeah, they play bully ball. They get the ball inside as much as they physically possibly can. Um, and once again, Xavier has struggled at their interior defense, but it's a give and take because I feel like if that they got that matchup though, they would be able to feast uh in the backcourt, getting around defenders and shooting from the perimeter. So that would be an interesting matchup. They don't have anyone. They're a really balanced scoring team, kind of like Xavier. Their leading scorer averages 13 a game, but they have four that average double figures.
Yeah, you messed a couple words up early today. I'd messed up that Saturday and Wednesday, so we're back on track here. But Michigan's got their big football game this weekend too, so I know they'll be
True.
locked in for that one against Ohio State. But
I think Michigan fans.
basketball wise, they have a tough matchup tomorrow against Virginia Tech. That's one I'll keep an eye on. But Xavier against any size this year, I think you'll see it against Kalkbrenner, who really struggled. Creighton losing over the weekend, but also, just a lot of size for a lot of these teams Xavier goes up against. And if they have to go up against Michigan and two 7-footers, that's something I'm kind of worried about for Xavier. Hughley being your tallest guy at 6'11", Freeman will offer some size, but he's more of a, high post player than I would say a low post a lot of times. And then you also have Hunter, which has been good at stretches and bad at stretches this year. So Xavier's got to work on that inside game. And if they get Michigan, that's going to be a tough task for a team that's really struggled in the front court, as we talked a lot about tonight.
Yeah, so Michigan's having an interesting season. They're having a pretty good year to start. They do have one loss, and that loss is it was to Wake Forest, who Xavier beat by 15. So you look at common opponents, that's a pretty good look. A lot of common opponents for Michigan. They also played TCU, who Xavier will play the week after the Fort Myers tip-off, which I guess that's next week. Wow, that is coming up. But they go to Fort Worth to play TCU. Michigan played them at home and beat them by 12. So that was a pretty good win for Michigan. TCU's a decent team this year. Not going to be at the top of the Big 12 per se, but still a Big 12 team. They played our good friend Travis Steele against Miami uh, at Michigan a few games ago, and their margin of victory against bad teams has been better than Xavier. Beat Cleveland State by 50, beat Miami by 30, and beat Tarleton State by about 23. I, I think to this point of the season, that's more of an evenly matched game. Once again, if you're Xavier, you're leaning on the fact that you beat Wake Forest and Michigan struggled with Wake Forest, but that Michigan at Wake Forest game was at Wake Forest, so we know how much home court advantage matters. If Xavier were to win, that's probably who they play because boy, Virginia Tech might be worse than South Carolina. They also have a bye loss this season. It's actually pretty recently for them. They are 3-2 as well as South Carolina, and they just recently lost to Jacksonville at home. They lost to them by 10. They have a 20-point loss to Penn State, who's not great this year. Uh, only a 6-point win against Winthrop. They and to start the year, a 20-point win against South Carolina Upstate and a 20-point win against Delaware State. Um,
Yeah.
so if
I
Xavier were to lose to South Carolina, that's probably who they're playing.
Well, I said going into the season that Xavier needs to play very well at stretches, and I feel like they have this year. They've had lapses, and I think that's getting back to Miller's comments on Wednesday in their win, just trying to show a full 40 minutes. And this is a very interesting week coming for Xavier. You have two important games where it's like we got to have our whole team buy in. And I feel like we've had that at points this year against Wake Forest, but it seems like Miller knows there's more in this team. And as a Xavier fan and a Big East that has been kind of fluky to start the year, the whole thing with college basketball, you thought Wake Forest was going to be a very tough game. Xavier kind of rolled to a victory. Creighton loses this weekend.
Yeah.
UConn's kind of been up and down at stretches already this year. So I say this is a very interesting Big East this year. And if Xavier can just continue to put wins together, stack wins together, of course, that means success, but also they just need this buy-in from the team. And it seems like right now, Xavier's starting to show that. And hopefully they can do that here again against two tough matchups this week.
Yeah, all right, John. Before we wrap up, let's get some predictions. Um, we'll just do the two Fort Myers tip-off games before our next podcast. So, how about this? Give me your score and winner prediction for Xavier against South Carolina. That is tonight, and then also just give me your winner of Virginia Tech and Michigan, and then depending on who Xavier plays on Wednesday, your prediction for there.
Well, I said that Xavier was going to lose to Wake Forest, if you remember correctly.
I do
So
remember that.
I'm gonna have to say Xavier does pull this one out. So we talked about, I just think the buy-in from this team is really good right now. I think they believe in Sean Miller's philosophy. It takes, 2, 3, 4 years really for a coach to get in there, build a team he wants. And right now with college basketball, the way it's moving, seen so many new teams with Xavier in the last 3, 4 years. I think Xavier does pull this one out. I think the front court does play well against South Carolina. They win by 15, 20 points. And they can go on. I believe they'll end up playing Michigan, and that will be a tough task going up against a lot of size for the Wolverines. But Xavier, I'll give them a win. Why not? Let's give them a 4-point victory against Michigan and win both games down in the tournament here this week.
Yeah, I go Xavier over Virginia Tech or South Carolina the first game, Michigan over Virginia Tech the first game, and that Xavier Michigan game. Once again, I said it. I think it's very evenly matched. I think it's two teams that are very balanced at the top when it comes to scoring. Um, but again, I think Xavier just slightly has more of an advantage when it comes to the 7 footers trying to guard some of Xavier guards, as vice versa, as some of Xavier guards trying to guard the 7 footers. So I will take Xavier winning the Fort Myers tip off. Should be an exciting week, though. There is a third game this week on Sunday, December 1st. Xavier takes South Carolina State, their second to last bye game of the year, but we'll talk more about that later and wrap up the and recap the Fort Myers tip-off after it happens. First game tonight at 8:30 on Fox Sports 1 in Fort Myers, and they'll play again depending on if they win or lose at some point on Wednesday. So no game tomorrow. But once again, thank you everyone for tuning in to another edition of the Musketeer Madness podcast. As always,